I never thought a single phone call could change everything. But that morning, as I scrolled through my emails with a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, I saw it. A message that immediately made my heart sink and my stomach knot. It wasn't from work, not from a friend, not even a bill I had forgotten about. No, it was from my sister, and the subject line alone was enough to make me pause. We need to talk. Urgent. The three words danced across my screen like a warning light I couldn't ignore. Urgent. That one word carried the weight of countless past disagreements, long-held grudges, and unspoken truths, and for some reason, I had an inkling that this time, it wasn't going to be a typical argument about who borrowed whose clothes or who forgot whose birthday. No, this felt different. I could feel it in the air, heavy and electric, like the calm before a storm no one could predict. I set my coffee aside and dialed her number. I tried to sound casual, pretending that I didn't feel the tension clawing its way up my throat. But as soon as she answered, I knew there was no avoiding it. Her voice, usually bright and careless, was tight, measured, and almost guilty. "Hey," I said, trying to mask my suspicion with warmth. "You said you needed to talk. What's going on?" There was a long pause, and in that silence, I could almost hear her weighing every word, every possible angle, every conceivable lie she might tell to make herself look less guilty. Finally, she exhaled sharply and said, It's complicated. Can you come over?" Complicated. That word alone triggered a cascade of questions in my mind. What had she done? How had I not noticed? And, more importantly, what part did I play in her web of deceit? I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and tried to calm the anxious storm swirling inside me. I told myself to be rational, that I should go in prepared, not just emotionally, but strategically. After all, if there was a lie here, and something told me there was, I wasn't going to let it slide without understanding every angle. The drive to her apartment felt longer than usual, the streets empty, but echoing with the tension that mirrored my own. Every red light felt like a countdown, every pedestrian a reminder that time was running out, and every stop sign a warning that once I crossed this threshold, there was no turning back. I arrived, parked my car, and paused for a moment before knocking. My hands were slightly trembling, and I realized that despite the years of sibling rivalry, the subtle games, and the petty arguments, I had never anticipated a betrayal of this magnitude. When she opened the door, she looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw her hesitation, the way her eyes darted around, as if searching for an escape hatch. Her normally confident posture was compromised, a subtle slump in her shoulders that betrayed the tension behind the carefully crafted facade. I stepped inside, keeping my voice neutral, casual even, while my mind raced through every possible scenario. "Thanks for coming," she said, leading me to the living room. The apartment smelled faintly of candles, something floral and sweet, masking the unease that permeated the room. I noticed the little things, the crooked picture frame on the wall, the half-empty glass on the coffee table, the faint sound of her phone vibrating in her pocket, and my instincts screamed that something was off. My sister had always been meticulous about appearances, about controlling the narrative around her life. And yet, today, there was a crack in the armor, and I could see it in every gesture, every word, every forced smile. I sat down cautiously, keeping my distance, letting her speak first. I didn't know how to tell you, but I haven't been honest with you for months." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my expression calm, while a spark of curiosity and caution flared inside me. "Months?" I asked. "You mean more than the usual white lies about borrowed money or forgotten plans?" She nodded, avoiding eye contact, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the situation. This was not a minor deception. This was something that had been carefully planned, hidden, and executed over weeks, maybe even months. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch, letting her anxiety build, because I knew from years of experience that people often revealed more under the pressure of waiting than under interrogation. She fidgeted, glanced at the floor, then at me, then back again. Finally, she said the words that made my blood run cold. I I took the money from the account you left me to manage. The words hit like a hammer. My chest tightened, my mind raced, and I felt the floor beneath me shift in an instant. Took the money? How much? When? And why? I struggled to keep my voice steady, to mask the whirlwind of emotions boiling inside me. Betrayal, disbelief, anger, and, strangely, a simmering need to understand the why behind it all. She swallowed hard, her lips quivering, and said, I didn't mean to. I thought I could pay it back before you noticed, but I couldn't. I lost it all. She looked down, ashamed, and in that moment, I saw the full spectrum of human emotion: panic, guilt, fear, and desperation, and it was raw, unfiltered, and almost palpable. I took a deep breath, letting the shock settle just enough to formulate my next move. I needed answers, details, context, everything, and she, knowing she was caught, was about to provide them all, whether she wanted to or not. I asked calmly, deliberately, how much are we talking? Her eyes flickered upward, meeting mine, and in that instant, I realized that whatever came next would define not only our relationship, but also how I would handle this betrayal from a person I trusted more than anyone in the world. She hesitated, and the seconds stretched into an eternity, each one thick with anticipation. Finally, she whispered, almost $10,000. I felt a cold wave wash over me. 10,000. The sum was staggering, but it wasn't the money itself that struck me. It was the trust that had been broken. The months of careful oversight, the late nights, the countless small gestures of faith and support, all vanished in that one admission. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on my knees, voice measured but sharp. And why would you do this? Why not come to me if you were struggling? Her eyes glistened with tears, her voice breaking as she answered, I didn't want to disappoint you. I didn't want you to be angry. I thought I could fix it before you ever found out. And in that moment, a strange mix of frustration, sympathy, and incredulity flooded my mind. She had chosen secrecy over honesty, control over collaboration, and appearance over trust. And yet beneath it all, there was the undeniable human desire to be forgiven, to be understood, to be saved from the consequences she knew were coming. I let out a long, slow exhale, the kind that clears your lungs of tension and prepares your mind for clarity. All right, I said softly, but firmly. Here's what we're going to do. My tone carried authority, not anger, not yet, but a calm that implied the next steps were critical. I would not react in a fit of rage, nor would I allow her deception to dictate the outcome without consequence. Instead, I would control the narrative, guide the response, and ensure that both the lie and its repercussions were fully addressed. This was not just about money. It was about trust, respect, and the line she had crossed. She slumped shoulders and seemed to shrink under the weight of the truth. I continued, You're going to tell me everything. Every transaction, every decision, every step you took that led to this. No omissions, no excuses. And then we're going to figure out how to fix it together. The room was heavy with anticipation, and I could see the shift in her demeanor, the realization that the moment of reckoning had arrived and there was no escaping it. She nodded, swallowing hard, and began recounting the series of small, almost imperceptible decisions that snowballed into this massive deception. Each word, each detail added layers to the story, painting a picture of a sister who had made choices out of fear, pride, and desperation. And with each revelation, my mind was racing, not with anger, but with strategy, with the knowledge that the resolution of this situation would define our relationship for years to come. As she spoke, the magnitude of her choices began to crystallize in my mind. Each lie she had told, each shortcut she had taken, was like a ripple in a pond, small at first, but now converging into a tidal wave of consequences that couldn't be ignored. I listened intently, letting the details sink in, watching her eyes dart between the floor and mine, the occasional glint of shame mingling with lingering defiance. I realized that while the money was gone, what really mattered was the breach of trust, the knowledge that someone I had confided in, someone I had believed would protect and uphold our bond, had consciously chosen deception. "Did you consider what would happen if I found out?" I asked, voice calm but heavy with expectation. She shook her head slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if admitting that she had no real strategy, no backup plan. I thought I could handle it. I didn't think it would spiral this far. I didn't want to involve you because I didn't want to disappoint you." Her words hung in the air, fragile and tentative, and I realized that beneath her fear, there was an honest regret. She hadn't intended to harm me, at least not maliciously, but intention mattered little compared to reality. The lie had happened, the money was gone, and now we had to navigate the aftermath. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers and taking a slow, deliberate breath. "Listen carefully," I said, my tone measured. "You made a choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. This isn't about punishment. This isn't about rage, although I'll admit part of me is angry. It's about responsibility, accountability, and most importantly, repair." I could see her nod slightly, the first sign that my words were registering, that she understood the gravity of the situation. But I also sensed the fear, the anxiety, the unspoken question, could forgiveness exist in the wake of betrayal? I decided to frame it as a challenge, not a lecture. "We're going to fix this, but it's going to take work. Every cent, every decision, every action that contributed to this, we'll address it. Together." Her eyes widened slightly, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Together?" she whispered. "Yes," I replied, letting the word hang in the air. "Because if you face this alone, you'll crumble. But if we face it together, you have a chance to rebuild not just the money, but the trust, and perhaps even our relationship." The shift in her expression was subtle but real, a spark of hope replacing some of the fear that had dominated the morning. We began to outline a plan, step by step, methodically, as if we were strategists mapping a battlefield. First, she would detail every withdrawal, every mismanaged transaction, every moment she had been tempted to cover up the truth. I listened without interruption, making notes, asking clarifying questions and probing gently but firmly. Each detail added clarity to the situation and allowed me to visualize the sequence of events, the domino effect of misjudgments that had led us here. The narrative she built was both tragic and instructive, a combination of poor judgment, unchecked impulse, and the quiet desperation of someone trying to maintain appearances at all costs. As she spoke, I noticed the subtle shifts in her posture, the tightening of her jaw when she reached the more significant errors, the slight trembling of her hands when she recounted the moment she realized she couldn't repay what she had taken. I realized then that while the money was gone, the emotional toll was equally significant. She had been living in a constant state of stress, of hiding, of anticipating the moment of exposure, and now, confronted with that reality, there was an opportunity for catharsis, for acknowledgement, and for a new beginning. Once she had finished detailing the financial aspects, I guided the conversation toward the emotional dimension, the trust, the respect, the integrity that had been compromised. "Do you understand why this hurts so much?" I asked. She nodded, though the gesture was hesitant, as if trying to grasp a concept that seemed obvious in theory but difficult to internalize emotionally. Trust isn't just about money. It's about knowing that the person you confide in will honor that confidence. You broke that, and the damage is deeper than the dollars you took. But here's the thing. Understanding that is the first step towards making it right. We moved from conversation to action. I instructed her to start keeping a detailed record of her finances moving forward, to create a transparent system where every transaction could be verified, every withdrawal justified. She protested weakly, claiming it felt excessive, but I reminded her gently that the system wasn't about mistrust, it was about restoration. By establishing accountability, she would rebuild the foundation of credibility that had been eroded. Slowly, reluctantly, she began to accept the structure, realizing that it was less a punishment than a pathway to redemption. As the afternoon wore on, we transitioned into discussing restitution. I suggested practical, manageable steps. She would set up a repayment schedule, begin making contributions to offset the deficit, and most importantly, communicate openly about her progress. She hesitated at first, overwhelmed by the enormity of the task, but I reminded her that the goal wasn't immediate perfection, it was consistent, responsible action. Every small step would rebuild confidence, not just in the eyes of others, but in herself. The conversation naturally flowed into reflection, and I found myself sharing my own experiences, times when I had erred, when poor judgment or secrecy had led to unintended consequences. I spoke candidly, not to justify her actions, but to normalize the reality that mistakes happen, that integrity can be restored through effort and honesty. She listened intently, her body relaxing slightly, as she realized that her situation, though severe, was not irreversible. There was a framework, a path forward, and with commitment, she could regain both trust and stability. By the early evening, we had mapped out a comprehensive plan: financial restitution, accountability measures, emotional transparency, and a commitment to rebuild our relationship. She was visibly lighter, the tension that had dominated the morning replaced by a tentative optimism. There was still fear, yes, and there was still uncertainty, but the air between us had shifted. Where once there was suspicion and betrayal, now there was dialogue, understanding, and a shared purpose. I took a moment to reflect on the irony of the situation. It had taken a significant breach of trust, months of hidden mistakes, and the looming threat of exposure to catalyze this conversation. Yet in the midst of crisis, there was clarity. Sometimes it takes the worst to bring out the best, the courage to confront reality, the honesty to admit fault, and the willingness to collaborate on a solution. I realized that this was not just about her learning from mistakes, but about both of us redefining our relationship, setting boundaries, and understanding the value of honesty, integrity, and accountability. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the apartment, we wrapped up our session. She looked at me with gratitude, tinged with lingering apprehension. "Thank you," she said softly. I didn't know how to handle this, but now I see a way forward." I nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "It's not easy," I said. "It won't be perfect, but it's possible. And that's the most important thing." She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing, the fear in her eyes giving way to determination. I left her apartment that evening with a mix of emotions: relief, hope, cautious optimism. The road ahead would be long, and there would be challenges, but for the first time since this revelation, I felt confident that it could be navigated successfully. The lie had been uncovered, the deception addressed, and the first steps toward repair had been taken. The experience had been painful, humbling, and instructive, but it had also opened the door to a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, reconnect, and redefine the terms of trust and accountability that would govern our relationship moving forward.
The next morning, I woke to a quiet house, sunlight spilling through the blinds, reflecting off the kitchen counters in warm streaks of gold. The stillness was almost surreal after the tension of the previous day, a calm before a storm I knew was still coming. Even though we had outlined a plan, the lie my sister had told, and the ramifications of it, still loomed over us like a shadow. I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the aroma as if it were a small victory, a tangible reminder that some things remained constant, that some small comforts could still be claimed even amidst chaos. I checked my phone, expecting a flurry of messages from her, perhaps some panicked questions or last-minute excuses. Instead, there was nothing. No texts, no calls, no notifications. The silence was telling, a sign that she was taking her first steps independently, or perhaps a sign of hesitation, uncertainty about where to begin. I chose to interpret it positively. It was important, I reminded myself, to give space for accountability to root, without smothering it with impatience or judgment. Around mid-morning, I received the first update. She had started reviewing her accounts, reconciling discrepancies and categorizing expenses. The effort was meticulous, almost obsessive, but it reflected genuine intent. I felt a flicker of pride, tempered by the awareness that this was only the beginning. The lie had been significant, the breach of trust profound, and no amount of diligence could erase the initial damage. But the willingness to engage, to face reality, was a positive signal, a sign that the foundation for restoration might actually take hold. By noon, she called. Her voice was tentative, almost fragile. I think I understand now, she said, her words measured, careful. Not just the numbers, but why you're upset, why this isn't just about the money. I listened, nodding even though she couldn't see me. Exactly, I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. It's never just about the money. It's about trust, integrity, and understanding the consequences of your actions. You've crossed a line, yes, but acknowledging that line is the first step in respecting it again. She was quiet for a moment and then whispered, I want to make it right. I really do. I guided her next steps. First, transparency. Every transaction must be documented, and I need full access to verify it. Second, restitution. Start small if you must, but consistency matters more than speed. Third, reflection. You need to internalize why this happened and ensure it never happens again. She agreed, though I could hear the apprehension underlying her words. The process was daunting, the stakes high, but she seemed committed. That commitment, I realized, was more valuable than any immediate correction. It indicated an awareness that could shape her future decisions. Throughout the day, I found myself reflecting on the nature of lies and deception, on the ways small misrepresentations escalate when unchecked. My sister's lie had started as a minor omission, an attempt to avoid conflict or judgment, but over time it had grown, compounded, until it became a mountain of deceit that threatened everything she valued. I thought about how easily we rationalize actions in our own minds, justifying choices to ourselves, even when we know deep down they are wrong. And I thought about the responsibility of those around us, the duty to confront the truth when it becomes clear, rather than letting the lie fester and grow unchecked. By late afternoon, she had begun reconciling the accounts, her focus intense. I stayed nearby, offering guidance when needed, but mostly observing. There was something profoundly instructive in watching someone face the consequences of their own actions so directly. It was raw, uncomfortable, yet necessary. A kind of emotional and ethical workout, building resilience alongside accountability. The tension in her posture gradually eased as she gained clarity, each reconciled transaction providing a small, tangible sense of progress. Around 5, She paused, leaning back with a deep sigh. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. "I never realized how much I'd gotten myself into, how far the lie had spread." I nodded, acknowledging her honesty. It's the nature of deception. One small untruth leads to another, and soon you're managing a web that grows faster than you can control. But the important thing is, you've started untangling it, and that's what matters. Her expression softened, a mixture of relief and determination. I realized then that the process was already transformative. The lie had revealed weaknesses, but it had also created an opportunity for growth, for a deeper understanding of responsibility and integrity. That evening, I decided to introduce a symbolic gesture to reinforce the lesson. I suggested she write a letter, not addressed to me, but to herself, a letter that detailed the lie, its impact, her feelings, and a commitment to honesty moving forward. At first, she resisted, claiming it was unnecessary, that the work she was doing on the accounts was enough. But I insisted, explaining that articulation, putting emotions and intentions into words, was a crucial part of understanding and internalizing the consequences. Reluctantly, she agreed. She wrote for hours, her hand trembling at first, then growing steadier as words flowed. The letter was raw, candid, and unflinching. A confession, an acknowledgement, a promise. She admitted to fear, to pride, to moments of selfishness, and to the underestimation of the impact her actions would have on others. And then at the end, she committed to doing better, to rebuilding trust, to being transparent and responsible. I read the letter only after she finished, and I was struck by the maturity, insight, and humility it reflected. The exercise had done more than document guilt. It had fostered understanding and emotional growth. After the letter, I suggested a practical step. She would begin implementing safeguards to prevent future lapses. This included automating payments responsibly, creating reminders for financial obligations, and keeping open communication channels with anyone affected by her decisions. It was a systematic, almost methodical approach, designed to reinforce habits of responsibility and to embed accountability into daily routines. She followed through diligently, the sense of purpose growing as each task was completed, each potential pitfall addressed before it could become an issue. By bedtime, the apartment felt different. The energy had shifted from anxiety and tension to focus and determination. We sat together, reviewing the day's accomplishments, noting both progress and areas that required ongoing attention. The emotional intensity had eased, replaced by a quiet sense of achievement. She expressed gratitude, but more importantly, I sensed a change in her demeanor, a newfound respect for responsibility, a recognition of the consequences of deception, and a willingness to act with integrity moving forward. As I left her apartment that night, I realized the transformation was more than procedural. It was ethical and emotional. She had confronted the lie, acknowledged its impact, and begun the process of restitution. The lie had not disappeared, nor had the breach of trust fully healed, but a pathway had been established. Accountability, honesty, and deliberate action had replaced fear, secrecy, and denial. It was a turning point, a moment that would shape not just her immediate actions, but her broader approach to integrity and responsibility. I reflected on the broader implications. Lies, I realized, were rarely isolated events. They were symptoms of deeper issues: fear, insecurity, a desire for control, or the inability to confront discomfort. Addressing the lie required addressing those underlying conditions, creating structures and habits that prevented repetition. In that sense, the work we had done was preventative as well as corrective, laying the groundwork for a future less vulnerable to deception. By the time I reached home, night had fallen, streets glittering with the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off damp pavement. The following morning, I arrived at her apartment to find her already awake, the faint hum of her laptop indicating she had begun reviewing her tasks before I even arrived. There was a new energy about her, a focused intensity that hadn't been there before, a commitment to confronting the consequences rather than avoiding them. I could sense that yesterday's revelations had left a lasting impression, and the actions she was taking now reflected a determination to right the course of her decisions. I started the day with a simple question. How do you feel? She paused, considering her words carefully. Relieved, she admitted finally, but also a little anxious. I never realized how much I depended on shortcuts and half-truths. That moment of self-awareness, candid and unfiltered, was more valuable than any immediate financial correction. It showed she was not only addressing the lie itself, but examining the habits and attitudes that had allowed it to flourish. The process was as much about internal reflection as external accountability. We decided to tackle the largest area of concern first, her financial obligations that had been mismanaged due to the lie. I guided her step by step, ensuring each entry was accurate, cross-referencing statements, receipts, and previous transactions. Her initial hesitation gave way to precision, her fingers typing with purpose, eyes scanning for any anomaly that might have gone unnoticed. I could see her confidence growing with each verification, a visible change in posture, a shift in tone, as if the weight of dishonesty was slowly lifting. By mid-morning, she had identified patterns that she hadn't noticed before: overlapping bills, unnecessary expenses, and areas where she had overextended herself. I praised her attention to detail, explaining that recognizing these patterns wasn't just about correcting the present situation, but about preventing similar mistakes in the future. She nodded, absorbing the advice, clearly committed to a thorough understanding of her responsibilities. This was more than a correction. It was a transformation, a reconfiguration of habits and priorities that would have a lasting impact. Lunch came quietly, a brief pause in the whirlwind of reconciliation. We shared a simple meal, the atmosphere calm but tinged with reflection. I asked her what she had learned from the process so far, expecting the usual superficial answers, but she surprised me. "I've learned that avoiding discomfort only makes things worse," she said earnestly. "The longer I hide from mistakes, the more damage they cause. Facing them head-on is terrifying, but it's also liberating." Her insight revealed a depth of understanding that surpassed mere procedural knowledge. It was the kind of realization that could reshape behavior permanently. After lunch, we turned our attention to communication, how she would inform those affected by her actions. I stressed that honesty and transparency were essential, not just in words, but in intent. Half-truths or excuses would only undermine progress, and any attempt to deflect responsibility could undo the work we had already accomplished. She took notes, considering carefully how to phrase her statements, aware that the delivery of truth was just as important as the truth itself. This stage was delicate, requiring both tact and courage, and she approached it with surprising maturity. By mid-afternoon, she began drafting messages to key individuals, carefully balancing acknowledgement of the lie with concrete steps she was taking to correct it. I watched her as she wrote, noting the care she took with each word, each phrase a deliberate choice aimed at rebuilding trust rather than merely assuaging guilt. The tone was humble but confident, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing paired with a commitment to restitution. It was exactly what I had hoped for, proof that the lessons of accountability were sinking in, that she understood the broader implications of her actions. The day progressed. She encountered moments of doubt and frustration. Revisiting the lie, analyzing its consequences, and planning her next steps were exhausting both mentally and emotionally. I reminded her to pace herself, that transformation was a marathon, not a sprint. Small victories mattered. Each reconciled account, each carefully drafted message, each moment of introspection was a step towards rebuilding integrity. She took the advice to heart, and I noticed her demeanor lighten with each completed task, a visible relief that the burden of deception was slowly being lifted. By late afternoon, she paused to reflect on what she had accomplished. "I never realized how tangled things had become," she admitted, with a hint of awe. "I thought it was just one mistake, one small lie, but it affected so much. Relationships, finances, trust. I'm starting to see why it escalated." Her self-awareness was profound, revealing an understanding that mistakes are rarely isolated incidents. Lies left unchecked grow exponentially, affecting every corner of life. Her acknowledgement was a turning point, signaling a readiness to not only correct, but also prevent future errors. We spent the evening organizing the final steps for accountability. She created a system to track obligations, deadlines, and communication, a framework designed to ensure transparency and responsibility. I encouraged her to maintain this system consistently, explaining that the habit of accountability was more important than the immediate correction. She implemented the changes with diligence, her focus unwavering, and I sensed a transformation not just in actions but in mindset. The lie, while still a lingering memory, was beginning to lose its power over her, replaced with clarity and deliberate intention. Dinner that night was quiet but reflective. We discussed lessons learned, the importance of honesty, and strategies to maintain accountability going forward. She expressed gratitude, but more importantly, I saw a sense of resolve, a commitment to integrity that extended beyond the immediate situation. The energy in the room was markedly different from the previous day, lighter, more purposeful, and filled with a sense of direction. I realized that the work we were doing was creating a foundation for lasting change, not just immediate correction. As the evening drew to a close, I encouraged her to write another letter. Not a confession this time, but a commitment. A document outlining steps she would take to prevent similar mistakes, habits to cultivate, and principles to guide her decisions. She approached the task with seriousness, understanding the importance of formalizing intent alongside action. The letter became a roadmap, a tangible reminder of accountability and the lessons learned from facing the lie directly. It was more than symbolic. It was practical, actionable, and deeply personal. Before leaving, I took a moment to reflect on the day. Watching her confront the consequences of her actions, take responsibility, and implement corrective measures had been an experience of profound insight. Lies, I realized, are rarely about the falsehood itself. They are about fear, avoidance, and misplaced priorities. Correcting them requires more than acknowledgement. It requires structured action, reflection, and deliberate change. The day had been exhausting, emotionally and mentally, but it was transformative. Walking home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The lie had been significant, the breach of trust severe, but the steps taken so far were promising. My sister had demonstrated not only willingness but capability, a readiness to face discomfort and accept consequences. I felt cautious optimism. Change was never guaranteed, but the trajectory was positive. The day had proven that accountability, when embraced fully, could lead to transformation, integrity, and growth.
The next morning, I arrived at her apartment to find her already up, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, painting golden lines across her kitchen floor. She was sipping coffee, a notebook open in front of her, filled with lists, schedules, and notes from the previous day. The transformation I had noticed yesterday was still present, but now it was coupled with an eagerness that almost seemed contagious. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that carried the weight of responsibility, but also a hint of newfound confidence. "I started tracking everything," she said, gesturing to the notebook. "Every bill, every task, every call I need to make. It feels lighter somehow." I nodded, impressed not only by her dedication, but also by her recognition of the emotional impact
that honesty and structure could bring. Lies, no matter how small, create a hidden weight. Confronting them lifts more than just the immediate problem. It liberates the person carrying them. I made a mental note that this would become a theme, the freedom that comes from owning your actions. We began the morning with the review of her communications. Yesterday's drafts were polished further, each message refined for clarity, honesty, and tone. I reminded her that perception was critical. People might remember the lie more vividly than the truth if it wasn't presented thoughtfully. She listened, nodding, and revised each note, careful not to sound defensive while still asserting accountability. The balance was delicate, but she seemed to grasp it intuitively, understanding that integrity demanded both courage and tact. By mid-morning, she started making the calls. Her voice wavered initially, hesitant and unsure, but each conversation grew more confident. I could hear the shift in tone. The initial defensiveness melted into calm explanations and sincere apologies. People responded with surprise, curiosity, and even understanding. In a few cases, those affected expressed relief that the lie was finally being addressed. It was fascinating to witness the social dynamics at play. Truth, once presented with intention and respect, could mend fractured connections more effectively than any evasive tactic ever could. While she handled the communications, I took the opportunity to review her financial reconciliation. Yesterday had been about identifying issues. Today was about creating a sustainable plan to manage them. She had already categorized expenses, identified unnecessary expenditures, and begun organizing priorities. I showed her methods for budgeting, forecasting, and maintaining records, emphasizing not only compliance, but also personal empowerment. The numbers, once a source of stress, were becoming tools for control and confidence. Around noon, a minor crisis arose. A creditor called, questioning a payment discrepancy that had existed for months, likely stemming from the initial lie. My sister froze for a moment, her eyes widening, but I stayed calm, guiding her step by step. We verified records, explained the oversight, and proposed an immediate corrective action. The creditor accepted, seemingly surprised by her transparency and the thoroughness of her response. Her relief was palpable, a mixture of triumph and astonishment. I realized then that part of growth was learning to face unpredictable consequences with composure and strategy. Lunch was quiet, more reflective than yesterday. She shared thoughts I hadn't expected. I never realized how much energy it takes to keep a lie alive. It's exhausting, mentally and emotionally. I thought I was just being clever, but it's been draining. Now that I'm honest, even with mistakes, it's like a weight has lifted. Her insight was profound, echoing a truth I had observed many times. Lies are more than ethical failures. They are drains on mental, emotional, and even physical energy. Facing them can be exhausting, but ultimately, it restores balance. In the afternoon, we turned to long-term planning. The initial corrections addressed immediate problems, but sustaining change required a vision for the future. I encouraged her to set goals, both financial and personal, grounded in realistic timelines and consistent habits. We created a calendar, marking key dates for payments, follow-ups, and personal check-ins. Accountability, I stressed, isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing commitment. She embraced the process, her focus unwavering, as if the structure itself provided a sense of security and empowerment. By late afternoon, she had not only reconciled her obligations, but also implemented systems to prevent recurrence. Alerts, reminders, and cross-checks were in place, and she had even created a secondary verification method to ensure nothing slipped through unnoticed. I was impressed by her diligence. She had transformed her approach from reactive to proactive, understanding that prevention is far more effective than correction. The confidence she radiated was unmistakable, the kind that comes from competence, accountability, and self-respect. As evening approached, we shifted focus to reflection. I asked her to write down what she had learned, not just the procedural lessons, but the deeper insights about honesty, responsibility, and personal integrity. She paused, pen hovering over the paper, then began writing with deliberate care. Each sentence reflected thoughtfulness, self-awareness, and a recognition that the lie was not an isolated event, but a symptom of habits that needed adjustment. This exercise was as much about character development as record-keeping. It allowed her to internalize the transformation she had undertaken. Dinner was simple, quiet, but satisfying. The conversation naturally turned to the broader implications of her actions: the trust lost, the relationship strained, and the personal growth achieved. I listened, occasionally interjecting guidance, but mostly allowing her to articulate insights in her own words. There was a sense of closure, but also anticipation, a readiness to take these lessons into the next chapter of her life. The lie had catalyzed a transformation, one that was far more valuable than any immediate correction could provide. Later that evening, we discussed potential scenarios for future challenges. I posed questions designed to test her decision-making. What would you do if you encountered a situation where dishonesty seemed like the easiest path? She considered for a moment, then replied, "I'd pause, reflect, and choose transparency. The short-term discomfort is worth the long-term trust and clarity." Her answer reflected both maturity and a commitment to sustained change. I realized that the lie had not only been corrected, but had sparked a broader reevaluation of her values and priorities. By the time night settled, the apartment felt lighter, almost transformed. The emotional tension of the past days had dissipated, replaced by focus, clarity, and a sense of purpose. My sister, once anxious and burdened, now exuded a quiet confidence rooted in accountability. I felt a sense of pride and relief, recognizing that while mistakes were inevitable, the ability to confront them, learn, and grow was far more important. Before leaving, I reminded her of one final principle. Change isn't linear. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and unexpected challenges. The measure of growth is not perfection, but resilience. The ability to respond thoughtfully, honestly, and deliberately. She nodded, absorbing the words, aware that this was not the end of her journey, but a critical turning point. She understood that integrity, once embraced, is a lifelong practice, not a temporary fix. As I walked back home, the city lights reflecting off the damp streets, I considered the arc of the past few days. The lie, once a source of tension, deception, and avoidance, had become a catalyst for profound change. Confronting it required courage, patience, and deliberate action, but the results were transformative. My sister had learned that accountability restores not only trust, but also personal agency and peace of mind. It was a lesson I hoped she would carry forward, long after the immediate circumstances faded.
The next morning, I received a message from her, short but unmistakably confident. "I handled everything from yesterday. Feels like a weight is off my shoulders. Thank you." Even through text, her tone carried a sense of pride, and I could sense the subtle shift in her self-perception. It was one thing to correct errors in practical terms, but the true transformation came from the psychological relief of owning her actions. Responsibility, once feared, had become empowering. I decided to visit her again, not because she needed me, but because I wanted to observe the continuing effects of her honesty.
The front door opened to reveal a brighter apartment than I had seen the day before. Sunlight streamed in, bouncing off clean surfaces, and her space reflected the mental clarity she was cultivating. She greeted me with a smile that no longer seemed tentative, but steady and self-assured. "I reorganized everything," she said. "Bills, emails, even my calendar. I want to be prepared. No more surprises." Her statement carried both determination and the unmistakable trace of relief. We began the morning with a review of her social interactions. Yesterday's communications had been reactive, addressing past mistakes. Today, we focused on proactive engagement. I encouraged her to reach out to friends, family, and colleagues she had unintentionally misled, not merely to apologize, but to offer clarity, share context, and rebuild trust. Each message was drafted carefully, with emphasis on authenticity and emotional intelligence. I could see her confidence growing with every sentence. She was no longer hiding or deflecting. She was confronting reality head-on. Around mid-morning, she shared an unexpected insight. She said, "It's strange." She sipped coffee thoughtfully. "I expected people to be angry or dismissive, but most of them respond with understanding. Even if they were frustrated, they appreciate honesty more than silence." I nodded, reflecting on the social psychology at play. Lies often create a perception of betrayal far stronger than the actual event, while honesty, even if delayed, restores trust in a way that deception never can. Her observation highlighted the universal truth that integrity builds connections rather than severing them. We moved on to planning long-term habits, not just for accountability, but for self-maintenance. I suggested she keep a daily log of decisions, interactions, and financial actions, emphasizing that reflection enhances awareness. She adopted the practice immediately, noting not only her successes, but also small moments of tension or temptation. The exercise served as both a mirror and a guide, helping her recognize patterns that previously led to dishonesty. She laughed as she admitted, "I never realized how many tiny little fibs I told myself to justify things." Her honesty with herself was the final piece of the puzzle. Lunch was quiet, but filled with purposeful conversation. We discussed strategies for managing future challenges, temptations to cut corners, moments of stress that might encourage evasive behavior, and the importance of framing choices in ethical terms. I emphasized that integrity is tested not when everything is easy, but precisely when it is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or inconveniently profitable to bend the truth. She listened intently, taking notes, and I could see her absorbing the principle deeply. After lunch, a minor crisis emerged. A coworker questioned a previous report she had submitted, noting discrepancies she had overlooked. Instead of panicking or deflecting, she calmly reviewed her records, admitted the oversight, and proposed corrective steps. The coworker responded with appreciation for her transparency, and what could have escalated into tension became a learning opportunity. I pointed out how this moment demonstrated her growth. Honesty doesn't always prevent errors, but it transforms mistakes into opportunities for credibility and trust. By late afternoon, she had not only reconciled her immediate obligations, but also implemented systems to prevent recurrence. Alerts, reminders, and cross-checks were in place, and she had even created a secondary verification method to ensure nothing slipped through unnoticed. I was impressed by her diligence. She had transformed her approach from reactive to proactive, understanding that prevention is far more effective than correction. The confidence she radiated was unmistakable, the kind that comes from competence, accountability, and self-respect. As evening approached, we shifted focus to reflection. I asked her to write down what she had learned, not just the procedural lessons, but the deeper insights about honesty, responsibility, and personal integrity. She paused, pen hovering over the paper, then began writing with deliberate care. Each sentence reflected thoughtfulness, self-awareness, and a recognition that the lie was not an isolated event, but a symptom of habits that needed adjustment. This exercise was as much about character development as record-keeping. It allowed her to internalize the transformation she had undertaken. Dinner was simple, quiet, but satisfying. The conversation naturally turned to the broader implications of her actions: the trust lost, the relationship strained, the personal growth achieved. I listened, occasionally interjecting guidance, but mostly allowing her to articulate insights in her own words. There was a sense of closure, but also anticipation, a readiness to take these lessons into the next chapter of her life. The lie had catalyzed a transformation, one that was far more valuable than any immediate correction could provide. Later that evening, we discussed potential scenarios for future challenges. I posed questions designed to test her decision-making. What would you do if you encountered a situation where dishonesty seemed like the easiest path? She considered for a moment, then replied, "I'd pause, reflect, and choose transparency. The short-term discomfort is worth the long-term trust and clarity." Her answer reflected both maturity and a commitment to sustain change. I realized that the lie had not only been corrected, but had sparked a broader reevaluation of her values and priorities. By the time night settled, the apartment felt lighter, almost transformed. The emotional tension of the past days had dissipated, replaced by focus, clarity, and a sense of purpose. My sister, once anxious and burdened, now exuded a quiet confidence rooted in accountability. I felt a sense of pride and relief, recognizing that while mistakes were inevitable, the ability to confront them, learn, and grow was far more important. Before leaving, I reminded her of one final principle: change isn't linear. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and unexpected challenges. The measure of growth is not perfection, but resilience, the ability to respond thoughtfully, honestly, and deliberately. She nodded, absorbing the words, aware that this was not the end of her journey, but a critical turning point. She understood that integrity, once embraced, is a lifelong practice, not a temporary fix. As I walked back home, the city lights reflecting off the damp streets, I considered the arc of the past few days. The lie, once a source of tension, deception, and avoidance, had become a catalyst for profound change. Confronting it required courage, patience, and deliberate action, but the results were transformative. My sister had learned that accountability restores not only trust, but also personal agency and peace of mind. It was a lesson I hoped she would carry forward, long after the immediate circumstances faded.
The following morning, a quiet anticipation filled the air as I approached her apartment. Unlike the previous days, there was no tension, no lingering unease. She opened the door with a calm composure that reflected the changes within her, a balance of confidence and humility that had been absent before. Her eyes met mine, and without words I could see the pride she carried, not in being praised, but in having taken ownership of her actions. The transformation was palpable. We started the day with a discussion of accountability in real-world situations. I asked her to imagine scenarios where honesty would conflict with convenience, where admitting a mistake might lead to criticism, judgment, or discomfort. She considered each carefully, responding with thoughtfulness. I'd accept the discomfort. It's temporary, but the trust I maintain is permanent. Silence or deception might feel easier at first, but it corrodes relationships over time. I nodded, impressed not only by her reasoning, but by the evident internalization of these principles. Next, we focused on proactive communication. One of the challenges she had faced before was avoidance. Rather than address issues head-on, she allowed them to fester, creating a larger burden over time. We role-played conversations with coworkers, friends, and family, simulating potential miscommunications and misunderstandings. Each exercise built her confidence, teaching her that honesty, delivered thoughtfully, often diffuses tension rather than escalating it.
I reminded her that tone, timing, and context are as crucial as content. Her reactions grew more natural, measured, and strategic. By mid-morning, she began reviewing her financial records and personal responsibilities once more. Previously, the hidden discrepancies had caused anxiety and occasional dishonesty, but now she approached the task methodically. Bills were reconciled, obligations confirmed, and proactive measures implemented. She began using a system of reminders and cross-checks, ensuring that no detail could slip through unnoticed. It was a meticulous process, but one she tackled with energy and focus, as though the very act of organization reinforced her commitment to honesty. At lunch, she shared a reflection that had emerged overnight. "I realized something," she said quietly, stirring her tea. "The lie wasn't just a failure. It was a symptom of my fear. Fear of judgment, fear of disappointing people, fear of confrontation. Now that I've faced it, I understand that honesty is a choice, not a burden." I smiled, recognizing the depth of her insight. This acknowledgement, understanding the emotional roots of deception, is what distinguishes temporary fixes from lasting personal growth. By confronting the fear itself, she had dismantled the underlying impulse that led to dishonesty. The afternoon brought another test, though not one I had anticipated. A minor miscommunication arose with a coworker regarding a project deadline. Previously, she might have deflected responsibility or altered facts to appear competent. This time, she paused, reviewed the facts, and approached the conversation with full transparency. "I misread the timeline," she admitted. "Here's what I've done to correct it, and here's the plan to prevent this from the future." The coworker responded with respect, even admiration, noting that her honesty had allowed the project to progress more smoothly than if she had attempted to obscure the error. Later, we discussed the long-term application of these lessons. I emphasized that integrity is reinforced by habit, which includes daily reflection, proactive accountability, and consistent alignment between words and actions. She began designing a personal framework for continued growth, setting goals and checkpoints for honesty, responsibility, and communication. Her journal entries reflected not only logistical planning, but also emotional self-awareness, a balance of practical strategy and moral reflection. By early evening, we reviewed the week's progress. The apartment, once cluttered with papers, reminders, and half-finished tasks, was now orderly, almost serene. The emotional energy that had hung over her, anxiety, shame, uncertainty, was replaced by clarity, confidence, and a quiet determination. She acknowledged the changes not only in her environment, but in herself, how she approached decisions, how she interacted with others, and how she perceived her own capabilities. Before leaving, we reflected on the journey. I asked her to summarize what she had learned in a single sentence. She paused thoughtfully and then replied, "Truth frees you in ways that convenience never can." Her words encapsulated the essence of transformation. Facing uncomfortable truths, taking ownership, and embracing responsibility leads not to punishment, but to empowerment. The lie had been the catalyst, but the growth was the enduring reward. As I walked away from her apartment, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that her journey towards integrity had reached a meaningful milestone. She had confronted the lie, experienced its consequences, and emerged stronger, more capable, and more self-assured. It was a reminder that accountability, while challenging, is ultimately a path to freedom, clarity, and respect, both from others and from oneself.